Telepath The Wispers. Sarah had always been a little different from the other kids. From a young age, she could sense things that others couldn't, emotions, energies, thoughts even. Her parents brushed it off as an overactive imagination, but Sarah knew there was something more to it. As she grew older, the whispers, as she called them, only intensified. She could be walking down the street and suddenly feel a pang of sadness from a stranger, or pick up fragmented thoughts and images without any context. It was overwhelming and isolating. Sarah felt like she was going crazy at times. Her only solace was her childhood friend Jake. He had an open, calming mind that Sarah found comforting to be around. She could never quite read his thoughts, but his aura exuded warmth and acceptance. With Jake, Sarah didn't feel so alone. After graduating high school, their paths diverged for a few years. Sarah attended college across the state, struggling to control the incessant flood of thoughts and feelings that bombarded her mind daily. She avoided crowds, wore headphones constantly to drown out the noise. But she couldn't escape the whispers. One day during her sophomore year, Sarah was sitting in the library working on a paper when a voice cut through the mental static loud and clear. "I need to leave. I can't do this anymore." She looked around in confusion, but there was no one nearby. Until her gaze landed on a guy a few tables away, slumped over, dejected, the words replaying in her mind. Sarah didn't know what compelled her, but she got up and walked over to him. "Hey, are you okay?" The guy looked up at her with reddened eyes. "What?" "No, I'm fine. Sorry, just..." His thoughts tumbled out in fragmented waves. Failing grades. Crushing debt. Constant anxiety. Considering dropping out. Sarah shook her head. "You're not fine. But, you don't have to go through this alone." She spent the next hour talking to the stranger, whose name was Derek. Somehow, she just knew exactly what he needed to hear, words of empathy, solutions, a reminder that his life had value. By the end of the conversation, Derek's mind had gone from utter despair to hope. As he thanked her profusely, Sarah was floored. She had never been able to use her abilities like that before, deliberately interpreting and affecting someone's thoughts. She finally understood why she was this way. Her telepathy wasn't a burden, it was a gift. Over the next couple of years, Sarah worked on refining her skills. She started seeking out others in distress and helping them, one mind at a time. On campus, at work, even randomly on the street, Sarah became a secret telepath hero of sorts. When Jake came back into her life after being stationed overseas, Sarah finally confided in her old friend about her powers. To her relief, he didn't think she was crazy. In fact, Jake immediately saw the potential. "Think about how many people you could help with this," he said in awe. "The therapeutic possibilities are endless." With Jake's encouragement, Sarah decided to take her abilities public. She started offering teletherapy services, allowing people to open their minds completely and let her sense the roots of their issues. What would take months of conventional therapy, Sarah could unravel in a single session. Word quickly spread about the incredible telepathic therapist. Sarah's client list grew to include everyone from veterans with PTSD, to victims of abuse, to struggling artists and CEOs alike. Her ability to telepathically communicate and gently realign neural patterns was revolutionary. Of course, not everyone understood or accepted Sarah's gifts. There were the skeptics who accused her of being a charlatan, messing with people's minds. Unethical telepaths who wanted to exploit her secrets. Even well-meaning loved ones who feared for her safety. But Sarah persisted, knowing her mission was to use her powers for healing. Jake became her business partner, confidant and protector, ensuring she could focus on her work without worry. Then, one fateful day, a new client came to see Sarah, a strange, nervous man named Richard. From the moment she let her telepathic senses open up to his mind, Sarah was nearly overwhelmed by the chaos and torment swirling within. Richard's thoughts lurched between manic delusions of grandeur and crushing waves of paranoia and self-loathing. Fragmented memories clashed and kaleidoscoped in dizzying flashes of color and sound. Beneath it all pulsed a core of intense loneliness and abandonment. Sarah struggled to make any sense of the maelstrom, reaching out gently with her mind in an effort to calm the turbulent storm. But Richard's psyche was like a vast, endless void. Whenever she thought she'd found purchase, her mental grip would slip away into another fracture of splintered reality. For the first time, Sarah began to doubt her abilities. How could she hope to heal something this shattered and complex? She considered referring Richard to a team of conventional psychologists and psychotherapists. But then he grabbed her hands with startling force, his sunken eyes burning into her own. "You have to help me," Richard pleaded, his thoughts now laser-focused. "I know you can see what they've done, what they are. The others." Flashes of conspiratorial images and signals flooded Sarah's consciousness. Shadowy figures, strange symbols, seemingly innocuous words and phrases twisted with dark intention. Richard was utterly convinced of the existence of a sinister telepathic conspiracy controlling the world from the shadows. Part of Sarah wanted to dismiss his ramblings as delusional. But she couldn't deny the genuine terror she sensed from the very core of his being. Something had happened to this man, something indescribably traumatic, to leave his mind in such anguished tatters. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to try and help Richard. She would need to proceed delicately, mindfully, and marshal every iota of her telepathic abilities. If his paranoid fantasies proved too dangerous or overwhelming, she would have to immediately sever the connection. But she had to try. Over the next few weeks, Sarah attempted to meticulously reconstruct the fractured landscape of Richard's psyche. A presence, an insidious force that had clearly taken root in Richard's mind and slowly calcified over the years, like a psychological cancer. At first, Sarah thought she might be sensing a rift of her own abilities, a fracture in her telepathic perceptions. But she knew her gifts were too fundamentally attuned to the mind to make such an egregious misinterpretation. This was real. This dark presence was real. She followed the slimy tendril of psychic influence, an oily tether snaking back into the unknowable abyss of the collective unconscious. That was where they resided, the others that Richard had whispered about. An ancient sect of telepaths with powers and depths of depravity that Sarah's moral mind could scarcely fathom. They were real. And they had been manipulating Richard for reasons unknown, violating the inviolable sanctity of his mind and soul. Sarah immediately severed her connection, mentally reeling from the revelation. She gathered herself and placed an urgent call to Jake, relaying in succinct terms what she had discovered. For the first time, her friend's ever-steady presence was shaken. Within hours, Sarah had been ushered into a nondescript safe house, forbidden from contacting Richard or any of her other clients. Jake's military contacts had rallied a specialized telepathic intelligence team to debrief Sarah and formulate a strategy to pinpoint this telepathic cult. It seemed Sarah had unwittingly stumbled upon the greatest, most sinister conspiracy of all. As Sarah sat in the bare safe house room, haunted by the invasive presence she had encountered, she realized her gifts had laid the path for a new burden. The abilities she had sought to use for healing would now be co-opted as weapons in a coming telepathic war she never could have imagined. The whispers within had shown her the truth. And the truth could no longer be unheard. For weeks, Sarah was debriefed repeatedly by the telepathic intelligence team. Her every memory, perception and vision regarding the dark telepathic presence was dissected and analyzed to extrapolate any further clues. Despite her disorientation, Sarah did her best to focus and relay the disturbing psychic imprints she had encountered within Richard's shattered mind. The oily tendril, the sense of an ancient malignant force, the impression of a diffuse collective intelligence, she described it all in painstaking detail. The intelligence officers were deeply disturbed, even shaken by Sarah's findings. Clearly, they had suspected the existence of rogue psychic collectives, but nothing on this scale or with such capabilities for mental violation. An ill-defined region in Eastern Europe, where the cult seemed to have been operating for centuries right under their noses. Old-world villages hidden in vast stretches of ancient forest, passed over by modern society and technology. The perfect sanctum for psychic influencers to strengthen their foothold. A strike operation was hastily organized. Sarah insisted on being part of it despite the obvious risks. Her abilities were their best chance at breaching the cult's collective psychic defenses. Jake, too, refused to be left behind. His years of special ops experience would be invaluable. The cult was acutely aware of their presence, mustering their telepathic energies in response. She could feel thrumming waves of hostile psychic force buffeting her astral form. When they finally closed on the source, a tiny village nestled in a remote valley, the mental onslaught became overwhelming. Sarah's mind was bombarded by a chorus of voices, thoughts, and imagery more befouled and blasphemous than she could ever have imagined. Depraved psychic rituals, human sacrifices, acts of depravity that curdled the soul. Dimly, in the physical world, Sarah was aware of the assault team moving in, rappelling down towards the village outside her psychic periphery. But all her focus was pressed into maintaining her slender foothold against the churning psychic maelstrom pressing in from all sides. Malformed psychic entities, grotesque manifestations of fear and hatred swirled around her, lashing out with barbed tendrils of anguish. Then, cutting through the pandemonium like a blazing sword of light, Sarah sensed Jake's mind joining hers. His steely, implacable psyche formed an impenetrable bastion, allowing Sarah to shore up her faltering defenses and bolster her counterattack. Side by side, their telepathic presences lashed out in unison, Jake's military focus and precision augmenting Sarah's powers in a blazing cleansing flame. They tore through the miasma, banishing the malefic entities one by one and leaving scorched furrows of purity in their wake. Their unified telepathic focus became an irresistible psychic spearhead piercing straight towards the heart of the malignant hive. The resistance grew more frantic, more diseased, like despicable psychic toxins vomited up from the depths of the collective's transcendental consciousness. Sarah and her fellow psychics weathered the onslaught, pressing their advance with searing lances of mental purification. Finally, the diseased core of the cult began to rupture like a virulent blister. The last tattered shreds of psychic corruption were scoured and banished into the ether. In its place blossomed an expanse of hallowed silence. As the thundering footfalls of the assault team reached the village streets, all psychic defenses had already been eradicated. The cult's followers, little more than withered corpses, offered no resistance as they were restrained. In the smoldering aftermath, Sarah allowed herself to finally relax, and wept.